My name is Rita. I work at Cloudflare, and I'm the product manager for our product called Workers, which is our platform for deploying serverless applications. So today I'll be talking about how you can use Workers to improve performance, reliability, and cost for your serverless application, which are all things that I think all of us in this room care about. But before I dive into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Cloudflare Workers are. So I've heard Lambda get thrown around a bunch of times today. Outer functions got a couple mentions. But what are Cloudflare Workers? So Workers allow you to run code from the edge. So what does that mean more specifically? So Workers allow you to run JavaScript, specifically the Service Workers API, which is really, really perfect for serverless applications because it takes requests and responses and allows you to have full control over them, which is exactly how you want to be handling functions. The Service Workers API might be familiar already to a lot of people. It's generally used to modify requests and responses in the browser, but doing that at the edge actually makes a lot more sense for many use cases, few of which we'll talk about today. So when I started this talk, this is what the world looked like. But then we released support for WebAssembly at the edge. So now you can not only run JavaScript, but if you're passionate about C, C++, Rust, or Go, you can write Workers in those languages, compile them to WebAssembly, and deploy them to Workers as well. What that allows you to do is have much finer grained control over memory, extensive tasks too, so that really expands what you can use Workers for. The other thing that keeps changing is the number of points of presence that we have around the world. The joke is that we constantly have to update our slides to keep up. So to contextualize what it means to run code at the edge, I'm going to spend a minute talking about where code usually runs. So code usually runs in two places, either in the browser or at the origin, and there are problems with both. Running code at the browser means that a lot of the time you are, first of all, dependent on the client, which you might not have control over. And it also means that if you're doing certain modifications, you might have to do render blocking actions in order to be able to modify what's presented to the end user. Running code at the origin is scary. You don't always have control over it. And there are many reasons why we're all here talking about serverless, right? The other reason that it's bad is because we're all here in Milan, and most of the time our origin is in US East or US West. So we're all having to sit here and wait on pages to load. And even with functions as a service, you actually see the same exact problem most of the time right now. So functions are deployed in regions currently. And so even if you're not thinking about the server itself, you still have to make this round trip every single time that a user makes a request to your application. So maybe we don't have it so terrible here, even though I had to make the trip from San Francisco to Milan, and that took many hours. The internet is a little bit faster than that. But what about your users on Australia and all around the globe, right? You have to think about those users as well and what their experience is like. And currently, their experience looks something like this. We haven't beat the speed of light yet, so you have to wait a lot of time for things to make all the way from one side of the world to the other. So total 1,600 milliseconds round trip is really, really suboptimal, especially when you start thinking about every single resource that your application loads. With Workers, it looks something like this. So in each little dot that we have on this map, that's where a worker runs. And so no matter where the browser or the client is, we're able to quickly respond from the nearest point of presence without you having to think about deploying your function globally. It happens globally, actually, within 30 seconds. So let's say we're starting our own business, and we're going to build Instacat, which is like Instagram, but for cats. I looked it up. Turns out someone did try to build an Instacat, so it'll be like .info or something. So we can start writing the code today. That's the easiest part. So if you go to cloudflareworkers.com, you will see what we call our preview or fiddle, which allows you to quickly build a little application. So the boilerplate code looks something like this, which is pretty straightforward to understand. A fetch request comes in, you have to handle it. We have our handler function. Currently, this does nothing other than fetch it from the origin and then return the response. So if we were to build a cat image randomizer, it would look something like this. Let's say I have a bunch of cat pictures hosted somewhere. They all have random numbers, and we're modifying the URL to fetch random cat pictures. Great, done with our code. Let's go. But wait. First, we need to put the cat pictures somewhere, right? So where do they go? We have to pick a storage provider, right? And there are a lot of different options out there. So typically, you would go with one of them. And conventional wisdom says, put a CDN in front of your static assets, right? So you can cache them. Again, same problem of your users are in one place, your storage is in another place, and you need to get the cat pictures all around the world. But there are things that you might want to consider when you're picking a storage provider, and a single storage provider might not be ideal for everything. And this goes not only for storage, but for compute as well. If you're calling other functions or other services, maybe not everything you've been able to move to the edge quite yet. So we're going to use workers to optimize for performance, cost, and reliability, and choose the backend depending on that. And the edge is a really perfect place for that because it sits between the user and the end destination where we're going, and it's able to pick where we're going on the fly. So there are many ways to cache a cat. I'm going to talk about a credits first approach. So where this idea came from is actually, as I've been traveling around Europe the past 2 weeks, when I'm asked where I'm from, if I say I'm from the United States, I get asked about politics. And if I say that I'm from San Francisco, the first response is, wow, it's really expensive there. Like, yeah. So when I first moved to San Francisco, I did not have a job, and I was trying to figure out how to get one and survive. You know, it requires eating. And San Francisco is a very unique place because a lot of startups come there and try to succeed. So there are certain markets where there's a lot of competition that you as a person get to benefit from. So an example of that is food delivery. There are a lot of different food delivery services. And when you sign up for any of them, you get like $20, $30 for free. And if you're for a friend, you can get another $10 for free. So I found myself load balancing between these services depending on where I had $10 off on a given night. So you can do the same thing with storage providers. Replace the food with the different service providers that are out there, and you can do the same thing. By the way, I thought it was very strange when I was putting together these slides that all the food logos are red and all the compute ones are blue. This was not a design thing. There's probably some psychological thing behind that. But anyway, so the same thing happens with all of these different storage and compute providers. As you sign up for any of them, you'll see some sort of offer. This tweet literally came up for me yesterday of like, hey, sign up for DigitalOcean now and you get $100 for free. And so when you're starting out, especially if it's a pet project or you're a startup and you're as broke as I was when I first moved, you might want to try to optimize these costs. And so using workers for that is really, really easy. I just picked 3 random providers here for the sake of the example. But you can define your 3 providers. And because from workers, you can make as many sub-requests as you need on your way to the origin, you can make an API call to any of those billing systems and figure out, hey, how many credits do I have left in any of those? You can then figure out which one is the highest one and send your traffic there. So that's one way to cache a cat. Another kind of similar approach is, hey, what about bandwidth? Let's say you've eaten up all of your free credits, or what you're serving is very bandwidth extensive, and we all know how bandwidth costs are. So you can do a very similar thing, but rather than comparing the highest value, you make API calls to AWS and Azure and GCP, and you figure out, hey, where am I paying the least per gig, and send your traffic there. Another interesting thing you can do with Workers is optimize for performance. So that's kind of like going up the Maslow hierarchy of needs of startups, right? You optimize for cost first, but not at the price of performance, hopefully. This was actually one of our fans wrote this code, and we thought it was really great. We hadn't come up with it ourselves. So basically, you can race two different promises, one to Backblaze and one to GCS, figure out which one comes back first, and then serve the content. And the really cool thing about that is that no matter where you fetch this content from, because Cloudflare had already built a CDN, you get the benefit of caching at the edge. So you're really only making these calculations when something is not already in the cache. Most of the time, it's in the cache, which gives you that additional reliability that if the service that you end up resolving to is down, hopefully Cloudflare will already have the cat picture in the cache. But what you can also do is check for the result that you get. So if you expected a 200 back and you didn't get that, you can try another cloud provider. We also offer load balancing, so you can set that up with health checks, but this is another way to DIY it. So the result is cat pictures everywhere, distributed and hopefully delivered at a relatively cheap cost. This is my cat, Max, by the way. I miss him a lot, in case you can't tell. So yeah, you can serve your cat images closest to the users. But in the real world, you can, of course, do much more meaningful things and serve the content that's really, really important to your users from where is closest to them and at the cheapest cost and best performance to you. So more cats, more money, and less time, hopefully, is the result that we're all aiming towards. That's it. Thank you.